Howdy, can't talk, playing a game. I've had enough of this! Do you see the problem? Yeah, shit's on a screen. I don't want to play video games, I want to read them! But I can't because God wants video games on a screen and nothing else. You turn video games into anything but games and he will smite you himself. I found a loophole. Just put the comic inside of a magazine and pretend you're reading a walkthrough for Super Pitfall. God will be none the wiser. Some like to say that the Bible was written in 165 BC, but really it started getting traction when it received its critically acclaimed remake in 1988. Nintendo Power was a product of its time, back when information wasn't as easily accessible as it is now. No pulling out your phone and Googling the answer to your questions, you gotta wait a month for that answer, you bitch. Of course, Nintendo Power wasn't the first or only example of the video game magazine. Sega also had their own magazine called Sega Visions, and Atari had Atari Age, but no matter the name, they all have pretty much the same purpose. These issues have reviews of games coming out at the time, and a lot of them have Nintendo just overhyping the products to ensure greater sales. Some of these games didn't really need the extra hype because the game was, you know, good, while others, I'll give the market to deem this, they really tried with this one. Most would say that there's no reason to flip through these magazines anymore, since we know everything that there is to know about all these games advertised in each issue. But I would like to combat that argument by saying that these people don't know how to have fun. It's really interesting to see well-known games and consoles early in development, seeing how they were advertised back then, how they were presented. Yeah, some of them are the Virtual Boy, and others are my favorite console ever made. Then there are the letters sent in by fans, and reading them can definitely be interesting. Sweet glory of heaven, the controller is so standard-breaking, so tremendously beautiful. It just brings tears to my eyes. It's impressive that you can speak so clearly with all that dick in your mouth. The way these magazines presented some games was really well executed. So well executed, in fact, that it made an otherwise mediocre game look pretty interesting. They did this because Nintendo Power was mostly marketed towards children. Want a kid to buy your game? Make it look cool, said the higher-ups. So a lot of graphics, taglines, and artwork were used to grab an impressionable young mind's attention to ensure sales. However, you can only hold the child's attention for so long with paragraphs describing the game and screenshots showing it, because this style of advertising can only interest a kid for so long. So what can a million-dollar corporation do to not only keep its readers, but also advertise games in an interesting and fun way? A smug little shit and a grown adult was Nintendo's solution. Because that's the answer to most of life's problems. Howard and Nestor was the title of this little comic, running from 1988 to 1993. The two main characters, Howard, an actual Nintendo Power editor in the comic, and Nestor, the everyman any kid could relate to in the late 80s, was the first Nintendo Power comic to be printed. The goal here was to make advertising fun! Howard would often give tips and tricks on games and explain some of the mechanics, while Nestor would act like a cocky little shit with nothing to back it up. These comics are only 1 to 2 pages long, the art style is nice, it's nothing all that groundbreaking. Despite that, the comics have a cute little charm to them. They're really harmless and they don't detract from the overall experience of Nintendo Power. But of course nothing lasts forever, and eventually Howard and Nestor came to an end. The comic didn't technically end, but Howard, the editor, was leaving for a job at LucasArts, so he left the comic. It was then retitled to Nestor's Adventures. As effective as Howard and Nestor's comics were at keeping readers engaged, Nintendo wanted to be a little more bold with the idea. Instead of having characters explain different games and giving tips and tricks, why not have the entire comic themed around the game? The concept had merit. Instead of explaining the game's mechanics, you could explain who the characters are and what the story is. So of course, Nintendo chose the most obvious game to start this idea. It was between this and Pipe Dream, so Nintendo went with a less controversial one. There are 2 Battletoads comics that ran through Nintendo Power. The first were simply explaining what the lore and mechanics were, because the actual game? Yeah, there's not a lot to deter from this, so the comic definitely helped. Not long after, the second strip popped up, and it was something. This one gets into the origins of the Toads, and you'd think it'd be something along the lines of TMNT, where a couple of Toads fall into nuclear waste or whatever, but nope! The story follows a small team of expert gamers, Morgan, Dave, and George, who were asked to playtest a new virtual reality game, Battletoads. But the chief engineer really hates the attention these 3 are getting and works together with the Dark Queen to get rid of them by sucking them directly into the game and turning them into the Battletoads. What? That is only a little weird. But the comics definitely helped with the game's sales. I wouldn't call Battletoads a runaway success, but it definitely wasn't a failure either. The success of the Battletoads comics gave Nintendo the guts to branch out and cover more well-known franchises, like... Oh, Nintendo's kicking this shit into high gear. Battletoads felt more like a safe bet. If it failed, then they could just go back to Nestor. But since it didn't fail, we ended up with this beauty of a comic. The story of this comic is loosely adapted from the game, since they added a lot of creative liberties to make it a lot more interesting, like Rome, the Mystery Knight. The art is probably the most interesting part about the series. It was illustrated by Shitoro... Nope. I know most of you don't know who he is, but I know you're aware of his work, since he worked on the Super Sentai series, or in more American terms... Whether you know him or not, you can't deny it. The art is wonderful. It's interesting seeing all these classic characters in a new light, like Link starting off as a nervous kid trying to, survive. Ganon, who actually looks really terrifying and intimidating. Mr. I'm not even gonna attempt that name, has a little more character aside from, haha, I am evil! Lasers! Link's uncle doesn't die from falling in a pit, and instead dies like a real man, and the original characters exclusive to the comic are great. Like Rome. I want a ROM hack retelling the comics version of this story. It's definitely worth reading. It's a version of Link, Zelda, and Hyrule you don't really see. It would be so cool if Nintendo used this stuff as an inspiration for a new game. It's not that surprising that this comic was a hit. It's based off of The Legend of Zelda and Link to the Past for that matter. It's like being shocked by a clicky pen. But what about a comic based off of one of Nintendo's less successful franchises? Super Metroid, the best SNES game, got a comic based off it, and it's so... wonderfully disappointing. Let's start with the art. I think it's great. It contrasts well with the attention to detail the series is known for, letting the comic invoke a similar atmosphere to the original game. The comic is obviously retelling the story of Super Metroid, which is awesome because Super Metroid is filled with so many great moments that could work great in a comic like this, like the fight with Kraid, the wrecked ship, the fake Chozo statue. It's only 5 chapters long. You fucking... I understand that you could beat Super Metroid in an hour, maybe less if you're really good, but there's so much to pull from for this comic. Meridia, the Metroid cloning labs, the power-ups, the fucking animals. Kraid isn't even seen or mentioned once in this comic. I understand not wanting to spoil a lot of these great moments from the game, and I guess it's a nice taste of the world of Metroid, even if it's non-canon, but I can't see someone who isn't a fan buying the game because of the comic. Also, you picked the third game to adapt into a comic? I know the Link to the Past comic was also based on the third game in a franchise, but the story can be told separate from the other 2 games. Zelda games typically have standalone stories that Nintendo tries to fit into a timeline. Metroid actually has an overarching story it's trying to tell, so briefly mentioning the previous 2 games in a lore-heavy franchise is dumb. Halston is my favorite new character made for this comic. I like that he's basically just a weaker Samus with a knockoff power suit. I want him in a new game, and I want him now. Metroid isn't Nintendo's only classic franchise set in space. There's also the all-time classic Mario. I'm fucking with you. I'm getting to this, but we got Star Fox to talk about. As a franchise, I hate Star Fox. Why? Because its best 2 games are the same game, and it really likes to retell the first game, which is what the best 2 games fucking did. This comic was released back when the first game came out, and it tells the same stupid dumb story I've heard a bunch of times, but now it looks nice and the characters are more fleshed out. This art. I think this is the best looking one out of them all so far. Hey all, broken record here. Did you know I like pretty shit? The first Star Fox game didn't really explain its story. It was all just kinda shooty shooty boom boom, explode the evil face. This comic explains the story, explains the characters, and it does it all without being odd. Okay, there are odd things about this comic, but nothing like 3 teens turning into toads. I like Fox being a brash little shit who lashes out and is still grieving over the death of his father. Falco not being an edgy dick and actually caring about his friends is a nice change of pace. Peppy being a mentor is fitting, and Slippy is still useless. Kind of. He's got moments. Of course, there's original characters as always, like Farah, and she's pretty cool, basically just Fox's love interest, and Andros is actually a monkey, not a giant space face. There's 2 of him, by the way. This is a really good read, and it's really beefy too, 11 chapters total. Also, there's a Mario dog. Just thought I'd mention that so I could segue into this masterpiece. Of course Nintendo made a comic about Mario. Why'd you think they wouldn't? They made 2 movies about this franchise. Anything is possible. So the last 2 comics we just took a look at have much darker stories and grim worlds riddled with crime and war. So what's the Super Mario comic like? Something tells me this is gonna be good. Out of all these comics, this one deserves to be animated and put on Netflix. It is my favorite. It has the best version of Princess Peach in existence. She is so badass, doesn't take shit from anyone, and storms Bowser's castle with explosives because she can. Mario is still the optimistic, brave little hero we all know him for, and he nicknamed Luigi Luigi, and that's just fucking hilarious with today's context. Speaking of Luigi, he's predicted as very lazy, cowardly, very caring towards his friends, and I love him. Friendly Floyd is a unique character to this comic, and he's a salesman. Yes, you're supposed to hate him. Bowser is fantastic. He shows up, attacks the Mushroom Kingdom, raps about wanting to marry Peach, then turns people into stone, including Mario, and fucks right off. Everything about this comic is gold. It's the easiest to recommend. If you want to read it, you could look up the scans uploaded online, since it's free. For those who like having physical media, there's also the Super Mario Adventures book. Every comic strip ever released on Nintendo Power, including Mario vs. Wario. Short story shorter, Mario is a dick and Wario is misunderstood and deserves appreciation. I think I should mention that Zelda got a book too. Same deal here, it's high quality reprints, easily the best way to read this series in physical form. Unfortunately, Super Metroid and Star Fox comics have yet to be reprinted, which is lame because these are great. Metroid is on the short side, but that shouldn't prevent a re-release, and Star Fox is long enough and good enough to warrant a reprint. Come on, Nintendo. I want a complete collection. While we're at it, also re-release all the Howard and Nestor stuff. That'd be great too. Wait, I just realized having this book defeats the purpose of my loophole.